So why don't you introduce yourself first, Austin? Because this is on my podcast and everybody wants to hear about you before we begin.
Yeah, sure. Sure. So obviously my name's Austin, right? What do you want to know, I guess?
Well, what do you want people to know? Because this is an entrepreneur podcast. So, how are you an
Yes.
entrepreneur, maybe?
Yeah, that's great. So obviously, from an entrepreneurship standpoint, I've always loved business. And so at this point, I was excited with our group that we have going because I've got some big plans in the future. And where you guys have kind of had some experience back and forth with your own businesses. It's excited to learn from you guys and some of the experiments that you've already ran, trials you've already run, and also by reading these different books, we've got a lot of very successful people we can learn from. So yeah, I think for me, that's really the gist is that I'm maybe not quite an entrepreneur yet, but I'm nurturing the mindset.
Oh, I don't. Okay. Austin's actually my brother-in-law. So, I'm going to say he is an entrepreneur. He actually, on the side, will buy used cars, ATVs, motorcycle, like anything like that, and then fix them and resell them for a really good profit. So don't let him fool you. He is an entrepreneur, even though he doesn't see it. He really is. So
We could, yeah. I mean, I guess if you look at it that way, we can say that I'm still working towards finding my niche. I guess is the real thing.
yeah, because we've talked about that lots of times, finding out where you want to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when he has so many ideas, you guys really like if you sit down with him, it's so many ideas. So it's fun
So
talking.
some are better than others. I'll say that.
And just so everybody knows too, we are missing one of our members, and that's Stephanie. She'll hopefully join us next time, so you will get an introduction for her. But this is our book club, and today we were talking about Atomic Habits, right, Austin?
That's right. Yeah, and James Clear, he's got a lot of insight in habits. Oh my gosh. I You can basically read the first chapter or two, and if you can apply what he's got in there, you can change your outcomes almost immediately.
Yeah. So we
Okay.
were kind of talking about this before, and I talked to Stephanie about it before we jumped on this call because she wasn't going to be here. Um, so we talked about it, and I was telling Austin I had a really hard time reading the last, I don't even know how many chapters. So when Austin says that you can read the first few chapters, it's totally true because he starts repeating himself after, I don't even know what chapter it is. I'm trying to look in the book right now where those repeats kind of start. Like chapter 5, like the first 4 chapters, I think were like you
All
take
new
what you learn
content.
there, right? And then it applies elsewhere. But Austin did read the whole book
That's
because
right.
he listened to it in one of his long car rides.
Yes.
But yeah, so I want to hear, I think everybody else does, what stood out to you most, Austin, in the book?
Yeah. So, I don't know that there's one specific thing that stood out to the most. I think what I've got are a key few components here. The big one of these components that stood out to me was that we really don't have a lot of control over our future. And so he mentions that a little bit in there, but he does clarify that we have control over our daily habits, and all of our daily habits have control over our future. So in a way, we can shape, where we're going based on just what we automatically do every day. And that can be constructive or destructive. Our brain really doesn't know the difference. So what's really cool about that is that we can analyze our daily habits, and you can almost predict where you're going to be based on what you do on a daily basis. So that was something that I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. That one stood out to me. I think I took a little bit of a different approach to, like, because he always gives you all these examples and all these different things. So I
Right.
like hearing what you took out of it. So what are the other components then that you liked, or steps that you're kind of talking about?
Yeah. So are you referring to, like, for example, the components that um, begin a habit?
Well, you were saying that it's not necessarily one thing that stood out to you the most. There was like different things to build. I think you said to build a habit. Is
Yeah.
that what you were applying, like referring to?
Sure. Yeah. So at this point, the things that he mentions of building a habit, he mentions four components. He mentions a cue, a craving, a response, and a reward. That's associated with each one of our habits. And so I think about this down at the most basic level. As soon as I wake up in the morning, that's my cue. Right when I wake up, like, I just really need to brush my teeth. Like, as soon as I wake up, that's the first thing I think about almost. And so the craving here is stimulated almost immediately by the fact of me waking up, that I want to brush my teeth and feel like minty fresh, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
And so my response, I get up, I go brush my teeth, and the reward there is immediate. My mouth feels clean. I feel like I'm ready to start everything else. And so we can put those four components into any habit.
Hmm.
That's what's really interesting. Is that what you took away from his book?
Yeah. Yeah, I did take that away from it. It's you need the four elements to even make it a habit, even.
Right.
Because if you don't have one, then it's going to be really hard to make it a habit. So I thought that was really interesting looking at it at that way of it, rather than, oh, just to make a habit, I just have to start doing it. No, there's different parts or pieces that you have to put together to make it actually a habit.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was something I was going to say when you were talking, but I don't remember now. So you'll have to just keep sharing.
I'll have to keep sharing it. Well, something else that I kind of thought of while we are going through it. I can't remember if it mentions this or if this was my brain just wandering while I was listening to it. But as he was going on about different habits, I thought of habits almost like a tree. I don't know if that, like,
Hmm.
if he mentions that specifically, but I think of bad habits like a big, full grown, large oak tree, and trying to uproot that and get rid of it can be really difficult. And so, like any habit, it grows stronger and stronger and stronger the more repetitions you get, right?
Hmm.
And how a new habit is like a seed, like the seed of a brand new tree where it needs constant nourishment, constant care, and it takes a little bit of time for it to become self-sustaining. And he mentions that in here, that in order to develop a new habit, you have to make it really easy. It has to be
Yeah.
really attractive. It has to be obvious, and it has to be satisfying. And I think that's where the tree concept came to my mind. Is it's like it has to be so easy that even when it's hard, like you don't want to do something, it's still easy to get it done,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then as it becomes more a part of you, shapes that identity, it becomes more strong, more robust, like a mature tree, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that's a weird way to look at it or not, but
No, I
that's
liked that way of looking at it. With that note too, is he talked about habit stacking,
yes.
which I really liked that, where you can take already a habit, even if it's bad, and add a good habit to it to eventually maybe eliminate the bad habit, but also you can do it with a good habit to introduce a new habit because it's easier. So I
Yes.
liked the habit stacking too. That was actually something you don't think about because we do it almost without thinking, you know,
Right.
right? Like you're talking about getting up to brush your teeth, and then you have another habit after that that you probably do, but you don't even think about it being habit stacking because you just do it at that point.
Yeah. And I guess for me too, when you first mentioned habit stacking,
Hmm.
I can kind of infer what that means by what he said. But when he explained it, he made it very clear that using the cue, craving, response, and reward components, we can finish one habit, like you mentioned, like, for example, say brushing our teeth, and that you can use that as your cue to start the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what really solidified it in my mind. It's like, okay, literally the end of one habit is the cue for the next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I thought that was interesting. It's never something that I've actually ever thought about. So
Yeah.
that was, yeah, just bringing it to the forefront of, oh, I guess you could make things easier by having it be the cue, right? Oh, now time to do this. I finished this. So,
Yeah. And what I really like too is how he broke it down. For example, I've always struggled with working out. I think the
mm-hmm.
main reason for me is because growing up in a smaller town with my dad working on farm stuff, I feel like working out almost for me personally, it's like I'm back on a farm and I'm like doing this hard labor that I really don't enjoy, right? And so whenever I think, my habit needs to be working out, I almost overwhelm myself in
Mm-hmm.
that. And so he goes to break it down to you can make it so simple. Like instead of your habit being to work out, your habit is to change into workout clothes. And then
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
there, you're dressed and it almost takes care of itself as it moves on. So
Yeah, it seems more manageable, right? Because when you hear
yeah,
workout, you think of all the things with it rather than, oh, I just need to get ready for working out. And he even mentioned like placing out your clothes the night before, which I actually do that because my husband does that. So I started doing it because it was so much easier. Oh, they're already laid out. I should go because they're laid out, right?
yeah, yeah.
And
So
I do like too with that workout section because that's something that so many of us struggle with is working out. But he said, even if you go, I'm pretty sure this was him, that you go for 5 minutes, like make a goal to just go for 5 minutes. And you just being there for 5 minutes to actually start the habit is way better than not going.
for
So
sure.
even if you can do something for like way less time than what you really would want to do it for, just actually doing it is better than not doing it. So I did like that too, where it's just start doing one little thing with it rather than, oh, I've got to go work out for an hour, right? No, I've got to go for I'm going to go walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes. That seems more manageable to me than a whole hour, right?
Well, for sure. Well, and he also mentioned, that habits are made by repetitions, not by time.
mm-hmm.
And so, you mentioned specifically the 5 minutes, right? Like if you go 5 minutes every single day, which you don't, that's not too difficult as
Mm-hmm.
long as you're not like a 20-minute drive away from the, the gym, right? You go for 5 minutes, then that's relatively easy than trying to go once a week for an hour. And your
mm-hmm.
habit will be much more developed, even if you only went that 5 minutes
Yeah.
every single day.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he had a thing on that towards the end of the book. I can't remember what it was. It was like, time 30 days. If you only go twice in that 30 days, you're it's not a habit. Where
Right.
if you went, every day or 5 times a week for those 30 days, that's a lot of time that you went during that time. So it's essentially, building upon it and making it be a habit rather than sporadic.
Right.
Gonna do it, right?
Yeah. And then he also mentions how, initially when we're trying to develop a new habit, a major blockade in that is that we don't really use our identity um, for us at that point because we're not 100% sure. For example, we'll use the workout one. Like when I go to the gym, I don't feel like I'm a person that works out all the time. And so when I get there, it almost goes against what I think of myself. Whereas once you start going, I've been there for 5 minutes today, I'm there 5 minutes tomorrow, 5 minutes the next day. As time goes on, that identity matures with
Mm-hmm.
it as you develop that.
Okay, I'm glad you brought it up because that was actually my favorite part of the whole book.
Yes.
Was So here's the quote from the book that I loved, or maybe it's something I took out of it, but whatever. I wrote it down on my notebook and it starred and arrowed and everything. It's the focus should always be on becoming that type of person, not getting a particular outcome. So it's basically like you're saying, it's The goal is to become that identity that you're talking about, and I
Yeah.
love that. So it's becoming that type of person, not having a particular outcome, because that's what makes a habit, is becoming that identity, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and he even goes on to say basically like goals are overrated. Like he's
Yeah.
almost, I won't say he's anti goals, but he's basically like, well, they're either you achieve a goal or you don't. Where
So with the
let's
goal side of it, because I heard it was on his Instagram a while back, and so he talked about the goals, because you're saying like he's against it, and he's against like the SMART goals.
right.
So he wants it to be where, rather than, okay, I'm going to go to the gym 5 or 3 times a week, you give yourself a range almost. So it's like, I'm going to go to the gym 2 to 5 times a week, or like something like that, where you're giving yourself a range. So that way, when you hit the lower range, you're like, well, I still can get to the higher range. So you try to do better and hit the higher range, because you're not like setting a limit where, oh, I've
Mhm.
met it, I can stop now. But if you give yourself a range, it's, well, I still haven't hit like the highest point.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point too. It's
Yeah, I don't know if you've
definitely,
heard that from him, but he had that on his Instagram a while ago. I don't remember when it was, but I'll have to try to find it so I can link to it in the show notes. But
yeah.
something about that side of it, where you give yourself a limit rather than a set goal. But sorry, I cut you off. Keep
No,
going.
you're
What were you
fine.
talking
No,
about? The
you're
goals.
totally fine because that plays into it
I
perfectly.
know. I was
So
like, hang on, I have to say this before we.
yeah, it's great. But yeah, he goes on to mention, when you, let's say you set a goal, I'm not going to eat any junk food. And so really the ultimate goal here is maybe you want to lose a little bit of weight, maybe you want to be healthier, whatever, right? But the way he explained it in his book is that we could achieve the outcome, the identity, right? It could become where we're healthier, but we still ate a little bit of junk food in there. Maybe we lost the amount of pounds we were looking for, whatever else. And so, according to the goal, we failed.
Mm-hmm.
But according to what we were trying to get out of the goal, we succeeded. We were trying to become healthier, trying to become um, a person who identifies as a healthy person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that is something I hadn't even thought about really, because I was like, oh, goals are good, goals are great. But it's true. Whenever you break that goal, you're like, oh, shoot, well, I guess
Starting from square one again.
starting
Here we
from square
go.
one, I might as well just eat a whole bunch of snacks today since I already broke it, right?
Yeah,
Instead
isn't
of,
that's kind of how your mind goes, rather than like, oh, it's okay, I had one little cookie, it's okay. So how do, like, that's my next question though, as you're talking about it. We keep talking about fitness,
sure,
but we're business. So
that's right.
how do you think we can apply it to our business then?
Well, I'll
Or
say,
being entrepreneurs, I guess, because
well, I mean, being in business, I mean, there's not a whole lot of difference between being physically fit versus mentally fit, right? And I think business is a mental fitness game.
mm-hmm,
Um, but on those days when it's just really hard to maybe make that call to the client that you were really trying to get, or um, maybe you're just a little shy to approach that. Uh, let's see, I'm trying to think exactly how I want to formulate that there, but you're in this situation where you've hit a blockade. But if you have those habits set up to where, you know what, I'm just going to make one more, oh, I'm going to do this one more thing, then you can push through that basically. You
mm-hmm.
can use that to further that business.
Well, and so in the book too, he talked about the the college and the photo
Yes.
class, because I
Yeah,
think
I
this
love
ties in really well with this. Is
that.
so he talks about a professor that sat down with, I can't, was it Stanford? I can't remember what
I
college it
don't
was.
remember which school it
Okay,
was.
well, it's some college, and he sat down with this photography class, and so he divided the class into twos. One group, they had to just take as many photos as they possibly could. I think they're like they needed to hit 100 or something for the whole semester. Where the other ones had to produce one amazing, perfect photo. And it's interesting because at the end, what happened, right? The people that took the 100 photos actually had amazing, perfect photos, and they were amazing because they kept practicing, where the people that were trying to get the perfect photo would only take a picture if it was absolutely perfect in the aspects of the light and all this, but they weren't practicing it. So he said it was like mediocre work because they weren't practicing the whole time. So I think what you're saying, like on that sense of like making the phone call, yeah, it might be hard initially, but as you start doing it, it's just going to get easier. And
Yeah.
then you'll one day wonder, like, why was this so hard for me?
Well, and he mentioned in there as well, like the people who took all of the photos, like they needed to produce just a large amount of photos for to get an A in the class.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't worried necessarily, like you mentioned, about the quality, but they just got out there and they started working. They weren't, because it didn't matter. It didn't
Yeah.
matter how good of a picture they took. But by taking, like you mentioned, so many pictures, they just turned out great.
Well, they started learning, like, oh, well,
Yeah.
the light is better when it's hitting this way, or, because we kind of learn that inside of a business. I'll, like, for example, I use a product or project management tool, and I'll do a workflow the way I want it to be initially, the way I think it's going to work really great. But as I start working through it a couple times, I'm like, ooh, I need to tweak it. I need to add this. I need to add this. But by the time you've tweaked it, you have like this amazing workflow that now you can like just get stuff out super fast rather than like you really had to think about the process. So I think it's also just the thought of doing something over and over again to get the outcome that you really want. One
Right.
day it's going to be there.
Yeah. Well, and I really like that example too, because you basically just said it doesn't matter where you're at now.
Mm-hmm.
Find something that you really like, and start moving towards it. You're never going to have the perfect opportunity. It's never going to be the perfect time.
Yep.
There'll always be a barrier. And so there is always something you could do right now to further you along that path. And I always think about, I don't think it was this book, so pardon me, but it does apply, right? Like there's a guy standing in the middle of a large forest, right? And he can't figure out how to get out. He's trying to analyze the entire forest and figure out how to get his way out. And so finally, he thinks to himself, well, I can't see past all the trees, but I can see this first step in front of me, right? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to take that step, and then I can see the next step and the next step. And before you know it, you're outside of this giant forest with no idea of how to look at it. I think business is the same way, and it can come down to our habits too, right? Like we're always over analyzing how to get it perfect instead of just starting where you're at.
Well, and I've discovered this too. We try to make it so much more complex than it even needs to be. It's like where you started out in the beginning. You know, these habits should be simple. It's the
Yeah,
same way in your business. It should be simple habits because then it's manageable and you can get through it quicker.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And by using your time efficiently by automating the process in the form of habits, you
Mm-hmm.
can maximize the time that you're actually spending thinking critically when you do need that situation, I guess. But by automating some of those behaviors, like for example, business calls, paperwork, things like that, by automating that in that form of a habit, you can save yourself a little bit of time there to focus on the big picture.
Yeah. Another thing that I had highlighted in here was, and I wanted to read through it before I mentioned it, but it's highlighted. So guess what? It's coming. I'm going to
It's
just say it. So,
great.
so it says systems allow you to be happy anytime a system is working, which can be in different ways better than your first vision. So, I mean, I think this kind of ties into what we're talking about, just beginning and getting a system, because it allows you to be happy anytime a system is working. So the system's working if you just start trying, right? You take one step forward, your system's starting to work.
Right.
But but then it's going to put you in a different place than you first vision, which is actually going to be a better place than what you even first saw, because you talked about that in the very beginning, where we don't have control of our future, or we can't really, but little different habits can get us to a better future than what we even imagined. And so
Right.
I think that's like if you have certain systems, which is a type of habit, I think that was interesting in looking at it in a sense of a business side, because when we think systems, we think all the steps that go into doing stuff inside of a business.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think too, if you don't mind sharing a little bit of experience here.
Nope, go ahead. I love it.
All right, great. So when we were doing, and for those of you that are listening, I guess I had a business where we were doing custom coatings on guns and all kinds of different things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what originally it started as, is this coating works really well on guns and makes them aesthetically appealing. People really like to personalize
So I'm going to hurry
this.
and say it almost is like painting this gun a certain way. So if people
Yeah.
don't know what coating a gun means, it's
Yeah.
basically like you're painting this gun to look a certain way. So keep going.
But with that coat, like I say coating because that's really what it is. And I hate the term paint because paint will gum it up. But
Well, that's why I was like, I have to specify so
yeah,
everybody
right.
understands what you're actually meaning here. So
Yeah.
keep going with.
Yeah. But what I found is that, we started down that initial rabbit hole there. And what I really found is that the business worked better in other facets, meaning like we found that these coatings worked on automotive equipment, right? And we had people start approaching us to do, turbos or exhaust systems and all this different thing. It was completely different than what I initially pictured it, So we
Mm-hmm.
started this business with one thing in mind, and it wasn't going as well as we hoped. So we almost had to pivot to that different future, that one we didn't foresee, where holy cow, you know what? I actually like this better. And we took the initial step, and like most people do, it didn't work out exactly how we wanted, right? So we learned from it and made a second step, and it gets exponentially better as you make those steps forward. So I think that, you know, being flexible is also very important, being able to see what is and what is not working. And James mentions that a little bit in there too. How each person is a little different, and we have to tailor our habits and our identities to work for us, not really against us, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I mean, I tell people that all the time. Okay, this is how I do it, but that doesn't mean it's going to work for you. Tweak it to what makes sense to you, what feels the best to you, how your business kind of is run, what's your priorities inside your business. Everyone's is so different, which makes us all unique, which is pretty spectacular. So yeah, all of our habits shouldn't be the same.
Right. Yeah. And as entrepreneurs, our habits are going to look a little bit different than what the
What the
average person's
standard
is.
person is. Yeah.
Yeah, we've got 10 plates we're trying to juggle at any one given time, and you're trying to prioritize that and your personal life. Um, so I think, like you mentioned, systems can be such a huge benefit within your system once you streamline it.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, I think that habits are really a way of developing a system for your own life, if that
Yes.
makes sense.
Yes.
To streamlining how to maximize
Your
what
time,
you can
right?
produce, your time,
Yeah.
your enjoyment of what you're doing, everything.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, if you have a habit in place of doing a particular task, let's even say, starting your day for work, and it's like, oh, I check emails because I talk about workday startups. So it's you check your emails, you check your social media, but you have a time cap on all this, but you do like one thing and then it leads to the next thing. So it's like the habit stacking, but you set your limit and then you put it away because we would waste so much time in between. So if you get into the habit of, oh, I'm only checking this on startup and shutdown, think of how much time you could save throughout the rest of the day to actually work on certain other things, right?
Yeah, so much time. I spent a lot of my time in the wrong areas, but it's really hard to recognize that until you can create that own system, that own habit to maximize that time, I
Yeah.
guess.
And I think it's also like, even if you have a habit of being more aware, I think that's a special quality because it's not, some people might not even think of it as a habit, but if you can catch yourself like going down a rabbit hole, like towards the beginning of a rabbit hole, think of how much time you could save
Oh
yourself.
my gosh.
Like
Yeah.
I've started to do, for example, in my project management software, I have a spot to like drop things. So like if I start going down a rabbit hole, I'll take whatever that is and put it into this spot so that I can stop it immediately and go back to whatever I'm supposed to be working on, because I found that to work really well for me, and it's turned into kind of a habit of like catching myself and then putting it somewhere else. So it's, well, I'm not going to forget about it now. It's in another to-do area, but it's, I think that's the thing too. Like we think of habits as being so, by the book almost, like working out habit, eating habit. It could be so many other things that a lot of people aren't talking about.
For sure. I think, like you mentioned, having the habit of maximizing your efficiency in your system, that's really awesome. You can automatically recognize when maybe you do want to look into this further, but not right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's keep going and get this done.
Yeah, because there's
Publish it.
something said about finishing one thing at a time, right? You're more focused, you'll be more into it. But if you get sidetracked, then there goes the productivity on that side of it. So
Right.
yeah, so I've been trying to build a habit of catching myself. So I don't know, like I just think it's awesome that habits don't have to be the standard habits that you think of. You mean you're talking about brushing your teeth, right? That's a habit, but people don't really think about that as a habit. So
Right. Yeah.
right? And even like, I mean, there's little things like putting on your clothes every day. I thought it was interesting. I've heard that, you put your pants on, like you put the same foot in every single time because it's a habit. You wash your hair the same way or when you're in the shower, right? Because it's a habit. So
Yeah.
there's little things that you don't even think about. And so he talked about that too, about catching like the bad habits where you kind of have to start analyzing what you're already doing. So I think that's kind of interesting. It might be something that you just do without even thinking about because it's been a habit for 20 years or something like that.
For
So
sure.
like I think that's also a good thing to sit down and really think about what you like when you're doing it, like, oh, this is a habit.
Yeah. I think that's way good.
Yeah. So is there anything else that really stood out to you in the book?
I think that's the majority of what I caught in this. I will say, maybe as a last thing here, to mention, and you mentioned it, behavior that's automatic, that's maybe not benefiting us, habits that aren't necessarily as positive as others.
Mm-hmm.
He did mention a little bit of how to get rid of those. And so specifically for those ones, we do the opposite of what he said, right? You have to make it very difficult um, for yourself to do that habit. You have to make it unattractive,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to try to associate it with something that's not satisfying. And I think a big point that he had was we are very, very prone to losses over gains. We would almost rather uh, we'd rather save $10 than earn $10. Like we don't want to lose what we've already gained.
Mm-hmm.
And so that goes down to our behavior as well. Like we've already got this habit in place. I don't want to get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
Our body is so used to it. So it makes it very difficult to get these bad habits gone.
Yeah. Did he have in the book, now that you're talking about that, was there something about a percentage? Like, I'm trying to think if where I read that in the book. I thought I read it in the book. Oh, I have this highlighted too, because you're talking about mistakes. The first mistake is never the one that ruins you. It's the spiral of repeated mistakes that follow.
Yeah.
So, like it was like you were talking about, like, oh, I ate the cookie today. That's not going to change anything. But if you keep doing it, that's when you have the issue because that's the bad habit.
Right.
But I don't know. I thought there was a percentage thing that you're talking that similar to what you were talking about, but I cannot find it in my book right now. So, and it's not in my notes. So I guess it
I
doesn't
don't
matter.
remember. I don't remember seeing a percentage, but I just think about my own life, and I think about these bad habits that I have, and I'm like, oh, I just really don't want to lose. I really like my caffeinated soda drink, like, and I know that they're bad, but my brain just incorrectly prioritizes the benefit now versus the cost later. I guess if
Ooh,
that makes
yes.
sense.
Yeah, he talked about that. And I mean, he
Yeah.
gave the example of like smoking, right? You want the right now and you're not thinking about what'll happen in 10 years with it.
Well, what's even more interesting, he says, is even if you are thinking about what's happening 10 years from now, the benefit now trumps the benefit later,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we constantly are here in the now trying to find the happiness or the stress reduction now when we should be prioritizing the benefits of the future because our habits, like you mentioned, they stack on top of each other, right? And the gains also stack on top of each other.
Mm-hmm.
So he mentioned the more satisfying something is now, that is when we should caution ourselves of what it is costing us in the future. Because basically anything that is truly good for us isn't immediately beneficial, if that makes sense. It
Yes.
benefits us in the long term.
Okay, I found it because
Oh,
I'm
you
like,
found
it's
it.
in the book. I know it's in the
Okay.
book. It's not highlighted. That's why I couldn't find it. So it's on
Okay.
the same page where I talked about the spiraling effect of a bad habit. But
Okay. Let's see.
he talks about in here, you don't realize how valuable it is to just show up on your bad days or busy days. So you basically, even if you feel like you don't have time, you're showing up. Lost days hurt you more than successful days help you. If you start with $100, then a 50% gain will take you up to 150,
Right.
but you only need a 33% loss to take you back to 100.
Yep.
So, in other words, avoiding the 33% loss is just as valuable as achieving the 50% gain.
Yes.
So, I thought that was interesting because you're kind of talking about, like the shift where you had to work so hard to get that 50% gain, but it's only a 33% loss if you lose it. Like, I thought that was an interesting way to look at it because you're like, oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
That's crazy because you feel like it would be 50% again, but it's not.
It's not.
So.
Yeah. If you slide as much as you succeed, then you'll be less than when you started.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I liked how he said too in that part as it's it's I can't I've heard it somewhere else, but essentially what he was talking about is you need to show up on your bad days. I've heard a lot of people say, I think it was like an Olympian athlete's parent that told them that they couldn't quit unless it was on a good day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's essentially the same thing. Like those bad days are the days that you really need to show up and really do the habit, even though it's not looking so hot, right? Because
Right.
that's when it's going to like be really set into be a habit rather than just, oh, it's a good day. I'll go do it today.
Yeah. I,
Yeah.
I really like that. Very applicable to me in my situation right now. I'll say that.
um, Another thing that I thought was interesting because I talk a lot about automation in my business. And so he talks, and Austin already talked about it, automating a habit. So he talked about inside of this, it's automating good habits with technology transforms actions that were once hard, annoying, and complicated into easy, painless, and simple. It's the most reliable and effective way to guarantee the right behavior. And he also said, too, on the next page of this whole thing, it was each habit we hand over to automation frees up time and energy to pour into the next stage of growth. And I
Yeah.
loved how he said, like, the next stage of growth, because we don't really think of it like that. Like, we're like just checking it off the list, right? But it allows
Right.
us to be able to grow and do something else, something better, and more like growing our business, right? Like doing those little things is going to help you grow your business way more than you think.
Yeah. Well, and you think of all the companies that have just taken off and done well. You ask anyone within that company, and they'll say it was a very fluid, like they didn't even realize that these things were taking place because it was such a natural process over time
Hmm.
to find the automation or the habit or the streamline in there that just made them that much better, that much more efficient. And they became truly good by just making these small gains over the period of time.
And I think it
Just
was like you have to think too small, like simple. Like they were simple too.
yeah,
When they try to make it more complex, that's when they had more issues. So,
exactly.
and we forget that we always think, oh, things have to be more robust and we have to have a perfect plan and we have to have, but no, simple works every single time.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
But yeah, so do you have anything else though?
You know
Any
what, Megan? I think that's all I've got for this one.
I think so too. I think we covered like a good chunk of the book. And I mean, like we said in the beginning, if you only have time for like the first 4 or 5 chapters, it will impact and change your life very, very like, yeah, you're going to see immediately. Like, I guess if you apply it, you will
Yes,
see
that's
immediate.
the key, right? And
Yeah.
that's what I did. He does have some suggestions of going to his website. He'll list it in the book, right?
Hmm.
And so I went there and was able to basically take inventory of my daily habits and things there. And I found some ways that I could improve, right? So that's something that's beneficial too. Is you don't have to use his website, but just thinking of your actions each day,
Hmm.
how you could even have something that a habit that's not good but not bad, but a small tweak will make it a very beneficial behavior. And I think that was very valuable from this book. I think that was something that was very cool.
I'm going to have to sit down and do that because I haven't done it yet because I just
Yeah.
finished the book. So.
Yeah. It's
So,
also good. He does a personality test on there as well. And
okay.
so if you take that, it showed that I am very susceptible to what's the word temptation. I can't remember exactly what it was, right? I am likely to to take to
Take the easy road or
it's not even
fall or what's word
it,
does he use?
it had a specific word, indulge. That's what it is. I'm likely to indulge. And so my habits need to be different than most because I basically have to take the option away from myself.
Mm,
And the way to do that is in changing my cues personally, like I almost have to change the cue of what it is, or else I'm likely to fall. As soon as I hit the cue,
yeah.
that craving is pretty strong, I guess, for myself.
Well,
So
and
it was
he
beneficial to
talks about
see.
that with the cues because we didn't really discuss that very much. Is you might already have a cue that already does something else. So it's like you said, you have to switch it because they never leave. Like
Right.
even if like it's like when you quit smoking, if like you can still have that urge. So it's not like it just leaves you.
No.
It's always going to be there. So you have to I like how you said that you have to change it to make sure that you don't because we didn't mention that. So I liked that you brought that up at the end. So
Yeah. Well, I'm
yeah.
glad we're able to read this book and go through it. I think that it's a lot of benefit that we could tie in. And
Yes, I think so too. And we didn't even mention our next book is Business Made Simple.
yes.
So this is going to be a fun one too. I'm excited to read it. And I mean, he's fabulous. I don't know if you listen to his podcast called Business Made Simple, but he has some really great insight. So I'm excited to learn something new. But let's encourage everybody to apply different techniques to enhance their habits. Maybe that's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
Enhance their
Yeah.
habits, right?
Streamline and automate your life so that you can basically focus towards the next growth, right?
Yes, yes,
The next stage of
exactly.
growth.
Yes, just like I said at that one ending spot, right?
Yeah.
So perfect. Okay. Well, thank you, Austin, for
Yeah.
joining us.
You betcha. Maybe
And
we'll get Stephanie in here next time.
let's hope so. Yeah. Hopefully she's not so busy. She'll
All
be
right.
here.
Well, thank
But
you so much.
yeah, thank you.
Yeah. We'll
Okay.
see you next month.
Yeah, we'll see you next month and drive safe today.
Yeah, we'll do. See
Okay.
you
Well,
later.
I won't keep you any longer. So enjoy.
All right. Bye bye.
Okay, bye.